Okay. Hey guys, welcome to another live stream Q&A. Sorry it's been a few weeks or probably over a month now since we've done one. But we're going to get back to where we were last time. So if you didn't catch the previous live streams, we started off covering foundation. Then we moved into traditional framing. So traditional framing is a very large topic, and this is stick frame construction style, right? So basically just using 2x lumber, site built. We're not covering modular or like IACFs or anything like that here for this is just your typical traditional framing. So it's been split up into three parts essentially. Part one was talking about floor systems. Part two was talking about walls. So as you can guess, part three today we're going to cover roofs. So roof framing is, let me close this. So, roof framing, there's a couple different ways that are typically done to frame roofs. Let's go ahead and pull that down. So let's start off with what is probably, well, I'll tell you what they are real quick. So you have roof trusses, and actually let me open the window. Let me see. That's not going to show it. So let me just, roof trusses. Sure, most people have seen roof trusses. Pretty simple, whatever. Okay, allow, and then let's go images. So they come in all different sizes. These are engineered roof trusses. So an engineer designs these based on the specifications that you need for your particular structure. That is not what I wanted to go to. How do you just open image? That's as big as it gets. Okay. So they'll design roof trusses based on the shape, the size of the roof that you have, the slope, all that, right? Your roof pitch. And then they'll take into account your snow loads, wind, and all that, and they'll design a roof truss that's going to support the roof based for all the design criteria that you have, right? So it's all engineered, and then each truss is manufactured in a plant under very strictly controlled conditions. Each truss comes out more or less exactly the same, right? I've made trusses myself for like sheds and things. It's not easy to get them all to come out exactly the same. You have to build a whole rig up on the floor, set up blocks in places, screwed into place so that every board that you place for that truss is going to go in exactly the same spot. Screw it all together nice and tight, make sure everything's perfect. When they come out of the plant from these truss manufacturers, it's going to be basically perfect every time. You may get one that's off every once in a while, send it back, they'll give you another one. But anyways, so depending on the shape of your roof, there's a lot of different styles of trusses. You can see here a lot of different examples of them. Let me see. So typically though, if you have like a steeper roof pitch with attic space, you may have something like this. This one, it looks like it is actually blocked out so it has a whole open attic space in there. And then it's just trusses. This end one is a gable truss. Has these vertical boards that's for putting your sheathing up on. But then all the other trusses behind that one have this whole interior space open and just have little walls along each side, struts there. You can also have like timber frame trusses using much larger timber lumber, and these will be spaced further apart. But basically that's one style of framing a roof, and that's probably what you're going to see most typically in all areas of the country, I think, just about. Unless you're doing some really fancy timber frame stuff, which looks really nice. This is probably my favorite way to do roofs, but it's also the most expensive, labor intensive. It's a little bit rougher. But this is pretty standard. Like if you're just doing a garage or whatever, you'll see trusses like this just put up on top. So we'll go further into trusses in a minute, but the other type of roof framing that we'll talk about are called rafters. And this is basically just hand cut, site built rafters. So you just take boards 2x lumber typically for larger roofs. You'll usually see like LVL framing, LSL possibly. I think LVL is pretty typical. I joists are often used for rafters as well on like really large roofs. A-frames come to mind. A lot of times on A-frames, they'll use I-joists essentially for the roof rafters. There are some special things you got to do when you're using I-joists for rafters, because you got to block out any of certain points along the rafter there, since the I-joist isn't completely solid. But yeah, that's going to be a little bit more labor intense. So it's cheaper on material, right? Roof trusses are going to cost you, you know, a few $100 a piece for a typical structure like a large garage or a small house, right? So you're probably looking at a few $100 a piece at least. And then they're going to be spaced 24 on center typically, so 2 feet apart. So you can calculate how many you would have there, and then just multiply by, you know, 300, 400, or 500 bucks a piece, depending how much they are for you, and figure out your more or less your total cost there for material. For roof rafters, your material is just going to be 2x material, right? Typically 2x12s, although for smaller projects you might have 2x10s. 2x12s, you know, they're expensive for 2x lumber, but they're gonna be a lot cheaper than those trusses. You don't have the cost of the engineering going into that. So it's kind of, they both can be used in pretty much all the same situations. There's not a lot of situations where you can use one and not the other, right? So it's for the most part pretty interchangeable in most standard builds. You can go with either rafters or trusses. Trusses are going to be faster to put up, but the material costs more. Rafters are typically going to take a little bit longer unless you have a crew that just does it all the time. That's all they do are hand cut rafters. They can basically get rafters put up in the same amount of time as trusses. I've seen it done, but that's not typical. Most people nowadays build with trusses. So when you ask some guys to do a whole roof with hand cut rafters, it's usually going to take them a little bit longer, right? Trusses are usually done in a day. Okay, they'll be delivered to site. You get a crane on site. That crane will lift them up, sometimes even a handful at a time. You'll have a couple carpenters up on top of the walls placing each truss as the crane brings them in. And it literally, you can do a whole roof in a day. Okay, maybe 2 days if it's a really large roof, but yeah, 1 day you get the roof done with trusses and you move on, right? With hand cut rafters, especially if you're doing a large or more complex roof, it's going to take them a couple days to get that done, probably. At a minimum, it could take up to a week if you have a very complex roof, right? So pros and cons, right? Rafters, hand cut rafters, they're cheaper material. Like I said, 2x materials could be cheaper than trusses, but you're gonna have more labor costs going into that. So another reason you might want to use one over the other, right? Insulation factor. Think about if you're just doing rafters, hand cut rafters, you basically have only that 2x12 width, right? Unless you block up your walls at the top of the walls. And so what I'm talking about, let me see if I can find a good illustration, because with rafters you run into some issues with insulation. Well, we'll cover that more in a minute. So just understand that there are some situations where, like also cathedral ceilings or, you know, vaulted ceilings, trusses aren't going to work very well for that. You can do scissor trusses, which will give you a little bit of a vaulted ceiling, but it won't be the full, you know, roof slope. So if you wanted to get that, you got to go with rafters. Therefore, all of your insulation, everything will be in between the rafters, and then your usually sheetrock or your tongue and groove or whatever you're doing for a ceiling material will go right on the bottom of those rafters. You do also have rafter ties, collar ties, things like that. I'll discuss that more in a minute as we go into more detail here. But essentially the things to know here are there are some pros and cons to using each style. Trusses are going to be more common. Rafters are more situational. They're going to be used in almost every home will have some hand cut rafters in a few spots around the house where it doesn't make sense to do a truss. But yeah, it's going to be typically trusses is what you're going to go with. So let's go talk about trusses here, and let me check the comments. I forgot to have that pulled up here. Apologies. Hello, everyone. KJ, good to see you again. Love Bones. Good to see you too. Ask for a raised heel. Yeah, so that was something I was going to mention. So let's go into detail about the trusses real quick. I actually had that brought up here already because that's something a lot of people don't understand the difference of. When it comes to trusses, there are different types of trusses, and you can request the one that you want, right? Let's see, is this going to get bigger? Yeah, there we go. That's a nice big picture. Why can't they all be like that? So let's talk about trusses. the major difference with truss is going to come in the way that it sits on top of your wall. Okay, so typical truss, as it's labeled here, is going to be kind of like this. Sorry, my head's kind of in the way there. So you got your sub fascia and fascia out here on the end. That's what these arrows are indicating. You've got your bottom cord of the truss that's going to rest on top of the wall, and then your top cord comes right down across to where the bottom of that top cord touches the top of the wall, right? That does not leave you a lot of space down here in the end, in the eave of the roof. Maybe we should talk about roof terminology real quick. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it, but not everybody might be. Let me see if there's a good diagram for it real quick. I just thought of that. I realized this is all very common for me, but for some people it may not be terminology. If I could focus for a second on what I'm typing. Because there's a few terms that you should know when it comes to roofs, parts of a roof. I think this will give us more or less what I want to say. So you do a flat roof. You got flashing is going to be usually metal, sometimes tape or other types of material that will go up against any wall that has a roof terminating at it, right? As you can see right here, there's a wall and the roof comes up to the wall. You're going to want flashing there. You have hip roof. That's where the roof, see how this one at the end here, it's got kind of that pyramid shape to it, where both corners angle up to the ridge. That's called a hip roof. The ridge, as I already mentioned, the ridge is your top of the roof, right? Well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's the ridge at the top of the roof. You also have a gable. So instead of a hip, you could have a gable. A gable is like this side, where you have the full triangle there, right? There's no slope down to the corners. It's just a full triangle, so you could fit a whole truss right there at the end, right? So that's a gable. Valley. A valley is anywhere where you have two roofs meet and you have this kind of concave edge, right? So an outside edge gives you a hip, an inside edge gives you a valley. So that's another important term to know. Soffit is going to be underneath your overhangs. Overhang, that's another good term to know. Overhang is the part of the roof that goes past the wall. And it's another fairly self-explanatory term. Yeah, I don't really see anything else. So fascia, and this is what made me think of it because I mentioned that word before. Not everybody knows exactly what that refers to, right? So fascia, in this case, let me get out of the way over here. So you have, if I can get all the way out of the way. Okay. So you have your fascia is the board that runs along that whole edge of your eave. The eave is usually the part that overhangs, right? So you have your gable, that triangle at the end that we already discussed, and then your eave is anywhere where a roof overhangs your wall. Okay. That's just kind of that slope overhangs the wall, not the gable part overhangs, but the actual slope of the roof overhangs the wall, if that makes sense. So this here is an eave that we're looking at from a front perspective. Your fascia goes on the end of all those rafters, and it's going to be the board that runs all the way laterally along the roof there at the end. Your soffit goes underneath here, so it can either be up like this at an angle, or a lot of times they'll do what's called a bird's mouth here, where you basically make it to where the soffit comes straight across the bottom there, so that you have it flat instead of up at an angle like that. So I think that covers all of it. If there's any terms that I say and you're not sure what they are, feel free to ask. Why is this not showing? Sorry, it usually shows me my information on the stream, like how many people are watching and whatnot, and I don't see that. I have my comments. I don't know. Something changed on me. I'll have to figure that out later. So anyways, I can't see how many people are watching like I usually can, but if you guys do have questions, go ahead and ask. The reason you don't necessarily want to go with the typical truss, sorry, let me come back up here. The reason you don't necessarily want to go with a typical truss is, as I already alluded to, you don't have a lot of space right there at the eave, okay? Now this becomes important when you have a certain insulation factor that you're trying to reach for your roof, aka the lid. When you're talking about lid insulation, that's the insulation in your ceiling or roof. So typically with most homes, unless you're just in a very hot climate and you're not too worried, although I guess even then you would want to have, I don't know what the minimum insulation is. Like in my area, by code, it's minimum R60 for your ceiling, for your lid. which is extreme for most places. I live in a very cold climate because I'm at like 6,000 feet above sea level. But anyways, if you're in a warmer climate, I know in Texas it's a lot lower. I can't remember what it is specifically. I guess it depends where you're at. But, so whatever your requirement is, you're most likely not going to have enough space there to meet it at the eave, which is an important place. You want to make sure you have the complete R value wrapped all the way out over the walls by code. That's what you're supposed to aim for. So they came along with the energy heel truss. Okay, just call it a heel truss for short. This basically takes the bottom cord and then spaces the top cord up off the bottom cord a bit to give you extra room there above your wall to get the full, let's say you need 12 inches to get an R30, right? 12 with fiberglass insulation, give you about R30 there. So now that's going to meet code for most parts of the country. My area, you still need like double that. But that's actually our town still is on older code standards. So we still require R49, but they're in the process of updating that right now, in fact. So we're going to be on the newer standard pretty soon, which requires R60 for your lid. As well as some other things which are crazy. I'm not sure. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about updating to the more recent code when you live in a rural area like we do. I don't know. I won't go into that. That's for another stream someday. So anyways, your energy heel truss, excuse me. The energy heel truss is basically designed to allow you to get the full amount of insulation R value all the way out over to the outer edge of that wall like you're supposed to. You also have this cantilevered truss. This is something I actually have not seen very often that I can think of or that I can remember. It's just another way to do it. In this example, I guess they would have you bring the insulation all the way out. See, this isn't a situation that I personally have ever built, so I'm not exactly sure how you would do the installation in that, but I would imagine, because you just need to bring it to the outside edge of the wall by code. Would there be an issue with, I guess not. There's no issue with bringing it all the way out, as long as you have proper insulation. This is another thing I want to mention. I've seen like open cell spray foam sprayed all the way out into the eave like that. You can't do that. You're going to have moisture problems. It's going to lead to mold. I've seen it on houses that I've inspected. So make sure you're using proper insulation for whatever type of truss you're using. But if you just go with a heel truss like this, you can pretty much do whatever type of insulation you want. You get and another thing I like about the heel truss is that you can lap your sheathing from the walls up onto the heel truss, and it just locks that roof. I mean, once you nail in sheathing that overlaps that joint there, that roof's not coming off. I mean, it's essentially part of this. I mean, it's all tied together as part of the wall now, just like all your wall studs are tied together with that sheathing. Now you have your trusses tied in as well. I think in some cases you can even do this to negate the need for like hurricane ties on your trusses or truss screws. I've been told that I would still use the ties or truss screws anyways. That's standard practice. I do that on all trusses. I would still do it even doing this. In fact, on my garage, I did this exact thing. I use a heel truss, lapped the sheathing up over the heel truss, nailed it all in. I'm still putting truss screws in every single truss in that garage as well. So it'll be extra secure. But I think I've been told from an engineer before that in some cases that will negate the need for that. But always check with your engineer on things like that. And if you're not using an engineer, go ahead and put a hurricane tie or a truss screw, something to attach those trusses to the top wall other than just the sheathing and the toenails, right? When you attach trusses to the top of the wall, they're just gonna get toenailed in by the carpenters as they're going up. That's why later on you come along and you add that hurricane clip or hurricane tie or a truss screw to really lock it in on top of that wall for wind uplift. That's mostly to negate wind uplift, but there's a few other structural reasons for those as well, I believe. I think that's pretty much it. The webbing, that's these interior boards on trusses. Those will vary a little bit depending on the design of your trusses and the loads that you're dealing with. But these, like what they show here, is pretty typical. Usually it's just kind of a V or a W design and it'll just be mirrored for each side of the truss. Main thing with trusses, when they're getting installed, make sure they do not get damaged. It's extremely important. Sorry, I think my mouse was over on the other screen. But anyways, so yeah, the webbing in the middle, top cord, bottom cord, those are just kind of the basic terms for a truss. They also have gusset plates on them. You can't see them in this image here, so let me go back. This kind of shows you the gusset plates. So the gusset plates are these metal plates with a whole bunch of slots in them. They got these sharp spikes on one side that poke out. They're pressed onto the lumber of the truss at the plant when they're manufacturing these trusses. These are what hold the different pieces, the members of the truss together, okay? Very important that these remain intact as they came from the plant or from the manufacturer. Just taking a plate, one of these gusset plates, and hammering it on with a hammer or mallet or something is not going to do the same thing. They are pressed on hydraulic. I think it's a hydraulic press or something like that. They're actually pressed on there with heavy machinery to get a nice tight fit. And just going back, like if you had to fix a truss, let's say you got a truss from the factory and it had one of these cords was broken, right? So you pull the gusset plates off, you put a new 2x4 or 2x6, whatever it is, in there as the new cord, and then you put that gusset plate back on there and you just hammer it on to get it back on there, right? To hammer in all the spikes on the one side. That's not going to pass an inspection, a code inspection, because that's not allowed. It's no longer to the engineered specifications. And you know, they test them and all that kind of stuff. So you got to make sure that those gusset plates remain attached, that they're not messed with, and they stay intact. Inspectors will look for that. They'll look for any of these, the 2x members of the truss. You know, the top cords, bottom cords, even the webbing. If any of that is broken, any of those boards are broken or even cracked significantly, an inspector should call that out and have you replace it. So when they come from the truss manufacturer, they'll come on the back of a truck, and this is usually how they get damaged. I'm gonna let you know right now, this is when you need to be watching, because they'll bring them on the back of a truck, and usually what they do is they will just tilt the back of that truck up and let them slide off the back and then drive the truck out from under them, and they just fall to the ground, right? Because usually they're very long. It usually does not damage them to do that. That's the typical way to. So if you see your truss manufacturer deliver your trusses on the truck and they just drop them off like that, don't think that they're not doing it correctly. That's how I've seen it done 99% of the time, right? But there is a possibility that some of the trusses could get damaged like that, you know, just based on circumstances at the site. So what you want to do is when they're delivered, look them over. Look at every single truss, look for any damage or anything, because the last thing you want to do is have it on crane day. You got the crane there, you're flying trusses up to the roof, and then you notice that one of them is broken. Now you got to put the whole thing on hold. You got to get another truss brought out from the manufacturer, or you got to get an engineer to approve a fix. It's not going to be a fast thing to get done. So you're most likely going to have that crane operator come back for another day so you can finish the job once you have the correct or the fixed truss ready to go. So you want to inspect them once they're delivered. As soon as they're delivered, inspect them all, make sure they're not damaged. If any of them are damaged, get a fix for that right away, whether it's going to be an in-field fix that the engineer approves, they'll tell you what to do to fix it, or they need to send you a whole new truss, right? So that's one tip. What else was I going to say? Yeah, I think that's pretty, those are the main things to look out for when you're getting the trusses as far as damage, right? Just look for any cracked or broken boards and any gusset plates that are coming off, right? Or missing completely. If they're missing, there should be a gusset plate on both sides of the truss at every single connection, right? But I think that pretty much covers it as far as that goes. Now, so when you build a roof with trusses, obviously these are big, flat pieces of board. There's going to be little areas in the roof that you have to fill in, right? In between trusses. Those are going to get filled in with just hand cut rafters or whatever, some hand cut framing on site that basically connects all those roof trusses together in those, like if you got a hip or a valley or something, well, if you and then I will mention that as well. So yeah, if you had a hip, you'd probably, let me see if I can find an example of that real quick. A lot of these things are kind of tough to describe with just words, I'm realizing. Yeah, that's for the rafters. We'll go into that. Let's see, truss roof framing diagram. Let's try that. I just want to see if I can find a quick example of what I'm talking about so you can see. I don't think that's going to show it. Let me do this. So hip roof, or it's not really, well, it's really valley framing on truss roof. Inches. Okay, so this basically shows it. I don't know how well you'll be able to see. This is another good picture here, but oh, that is a small picture. Okay. Basically, this will show it here. So you have, well, not really, because this is an overbuild. I don't know. Let me see. Again, that's more of an overbuild. Really, this tiny picture that was there was what I was trying to find, but it's so small. So you see here, you have trusses. Yeah, this will work. Do we have bigger? All right. So you've got your trusses here, right? Here's one truss, the top chord of one truss. Here's the top chord of another truss. Here's the top chord of another truss. That's the last truss right there. And that looks like it's actually meant to be a double because it's wider than this. So a lot of times you'll double them up as a girder truss at this point. Now you have all these other trusses in the background that are coming the opposite direction for the main roof, right? You can see them, they go all the way back. Trusses run all the way along. Well, when you frame these up, you're going to have this little gap right here in the middle with no trusses, right? Well, obviously your roof needs to connect from here all the way over to the main roof. So this part here all gets framed in by hand on site once the trusses are up. So they'll stand up all the trusses, get them nice and straight, plumb, everything. They're all going to get braced in place. And then the carpenters are going to come along and they're going to put in all these little, like these little rafters here, right? Essentially. Connected to a ridge board that they put up here, connected resting on these sleepers. This board that the rafter cuts are landing on right here is called a sleeper. There's one on each side, so that's what your rafters land on the bottom. The top of the rafters land on the ridge board. And that's basically it. So you're really still, even with a truss roof, you're still gonna have pieces or parts of it that are going to be hand framed, site framed with 2x lumber, okay? And that's why I say the more complex your roof is, the more it's going to cost to have done, right? If you're trying to build a cheap house, go with a real simple gable roof. It's just a straight gable from one end to the other, okay? No hips, valleys, overbuilds, anything like that. That is the cheapest way to build because you literally just fly a bunch of trusses up there, throw sheathing on it, throw some bracing on the inside, right? Some rat runs and stuff on the inside, throw your fascia on around all the edges, and you're good to go. Once you start throwing these little things, like these little valleys or hips or anything like that on, it's going to take longer to frame. Okay, it's just going to be a more labor intensive process. It's going to take a few more days. You're going to need some extra materials. When it comes to actually roofing that roof with whatever your roofing material is, whether it's shingles, metal, or whatever, it's going to be more of a process doing that because they got to do all these different details, right? Rather than just doing a big flat roof, flat on each side of a gable, is what I mean. Check comments real quick. I need to remember to do that every so often. Strong drive, truss screw. Yeah, I love those. Provides a truss and rafter to top plate connection as well as method of fastest. Yep, those are great. That's usually what I would use. Given the choice, I prefer to use those. I prefer to use those over the hurricane clips or ties, whatever you want to call them. Rat run, i.e. bottom cord bracing. Yep. And that's another thing with trusses. I should probably mention the truss manufacturer will supply a packet with the trusses. It'll identify all the different trusses that you have, their exact measurements, and as well as some other details. But the key that you need to be looking for is the bracing. They will show what the bracing that is required for your trusses is. It'll show where that it needs to be, right? How much bracing you need, where, all the details. Make sure that your framers follow what is specified in that packet by the manufacturer. Okay, I've seen a lot of different things inspecting new homes. Just please make sure that they follow what is specified by the manufacturer because it's not the same every time. It depends on your roof design. There are some standard typical ways of bracing roof trusses. If you don't have engineering done, like if you're doing handmade or site built trusses and you don't have it specifically engineered, I don't know, if you're doing a shed or something, right? There are some standard typical ways to brace trusses, but they don't meet the requirements in all situations. So nowadays, truss manufacturers will just diagram and with words state in their documentation where you need your bracing, how it's supposed to be attached, all that kind of stuff. So very important. But yeah, rat run. I said rat run before. Good call out there, KJ. That's another term, terminology, kind of industry term. It's just a board that runs along all the trusses. Usually you'll have one on each side. So like if you take the center of the trusses all the way down, you on one side and one on the other side, and it just runs across the top of all the bottom cords. It'll be nailed or screwed into each truss, and it keeps the bottoms of all those trusses. It keeps the trusses from racking one way or another, right? From just toppling over, essentially. And you'll have some other bracing that basically does the same thing, installed the same way, but it'll be on other parts of the trusses. Maybe on the bottom of the top cords, maybe along some of the webbing. Those are all typical places to see that. So that's actually something I didn't think about before, but that's a really good tip for you guys when you're building these. When you go out to look at the job that your carpenters have done after framing your house, these are some of the things you want to look for. Let's see. So I was talking about filling in the gaps between trusses in your roof. That's all going to be done with hand cut rafters and traditional framing there. Trying to think if there's anything else regarding trusses I want to mention right now. Not really. So when you're putting your trusses up, right, so you don't have a ridge board with trusses. You do have a ridge board with rafters. That's kind of a key difference between the two. Since you don't have the ridge board with trusses, when they're putting trusses up, your carpenters will put a piece of 2x material between the peak of each truss, which will essentially form a ridge board, a non-continuous one because it's in pieces in between each truss. But it essentially builds in a ridge board for you when you're putting the trusses up. Most often they'll do that as they're putting trusses up. Sometimes they'll just space trusses with maybe some boards on top or some actual manufactured spacers. And then they'll come back later and insert the ridge boards. I've seen it done both ways. I typically prefer to go ahead and do it at the same time as flying trusses, because while the crane is picking up the next truss, you can go ahead and have a guy up there getting that board put in and ready for the next one. Yeah, other than that, just make sure your trusses are spaced appropriately, that they're nice and plumb, straight, all that good stuff. You want to make sure they all plane out. So the top of all these trusses, and this is important with any roof framing. Sorry, I keep putting my mouse on the wrong screen. With any roof framing, you want to make sure the tops of all of your framing all planes out into a nice even plane, right? Because when you put sheathing down on top of that and then your roofing material, if one truss is sticking out compared to the others or is lower, and it'll make your roof look wavy. You definitely want to avoid that. With manufactured trusses, that typically won't happen as long as they're installed correctly. Make sure they're all turned the right way. A lot of times, at least when I get my trusses, one end will be marked either with paint or they'll put the tags. There'll be like a paper tag stapled on each truss. They'll put them all on one end, right? You want to get all those ends on the same side of the building, because those trusses come out of the plant. They're manufactured in a certain way that you want to have them all lined up the same way that they were lined up when they were manufactured. So that means you want to have the same end of all those trusses on the same side of the building, because that's how they're going to manufacture them. So another pro tip there, when you're flying trusses and they're going up, make sure they're all facing the right way, or that they're all going on the same orientation, right? Almost always they'll be marked somehow. One end of the truss will be marked, usually with paint or something, right? Because the quick and easy way to do is just spray paint one end of all the trusses. That way you know what it is. But like some of the places I get trusses from, they'll actually staple on a little tag that identifies that truss. They'll staple it on to the end of the truss there, so you know which end is which. Yep, I think that'll pretty much cover it. So let's move on real quick to rafters, hand cut rafters. Hand cut rafters, few new terms to know. You have your ridge board. I already mentioned that. That's going to be a board that runs along the length of the roof vertically, right? Turned vertically, not flat. And that's going to have rafters coming up to both sides of it. The top end of all of your rafters are going to land on that ridge board, and that ridge board essentially supports all of them. Okay. Then at the other end of your rafter, you're going to have, well, let's just work our way down from the top. So then you have your collar tie, which is kind of, it could be anywhere, honestly, in here from right down here near the bottom to right up here where they show it here near the top, or even just right in the middle. Collar ties add extra stability to the rafters. A lot of times they also support holding the tops. So that's why usually you'll see it closer to the top. But I've seen different things. It depends how how the roof is engineered and what your loads are. But yeah, typically you'll see it near the top there, and it's just going to make sure that those two, that the tops of the rafters on opposing sides don't spread from each other, right? Then you have your rafter tie is right here at the bottom. This is usually going to be a ceiling joist. In a lot of cases, it's just going to be a 2x material that runs across the top of your walls for your ceiling to attach to, right? But it's going to be attached to the ends of your rafters down here at the bottom, right where they meet the top of the wall. So that's going to hold the ends of the rafters together so that they don't spread out like that, right? It's going to hold them in nice and tight at the bottom so that you don't just kind of flatten that roof down. So that's also important. Obviously, the rafters are going to be nailed into the top of the roof. Where the rafter meets the roof, let me see if, well, I don't really identify it there, but that is a picture of it. I wanted to see if there was a good, there's what's called a bird's mouth cut in the rafter, and this is what allows the rafter to rest on the okay, so you see right here you got your let's say this is a 2x12 rafter, okay, and it's running all the way down. Right where it meets the wall here, you'll notice that it's got this little cut in where the wall kind of takes a chunk out of the rafter, right? That's called a bird's mouth. It's a cut that your carpenters will make on the rafter before it goes up. They measure it out. They know right where it's going to land on the top of that wall. They cut out that little bird's mouth so that it has a nice seat for that rafter to sit on top of the wall. So it has plenty of bearing on the top of that wall, right? Bearing is an important thing to know or to understand within home construction, because load bearing, you'll hear it in a lot of different uses like load bearing walls, bearing points. There's also point loads and things like that. So there's a few different terms that all kind of refer to the same thing as the path of, what's it called? The word I'm thinking of. Anyways, it's the path that loads will travel all the way from the top of the structure to the bottom of the structure, right? So you have to have posts, beams, and all that kind of stuff to carry the load from the top of the structure down to the ground. So bearing, when you have rafters, joists, anything like that, by code, you're required to have a certain amount of bearing on top of anything that those rest on, right? So in this case, a wall, these rafters are resting on top of the wall. They need to have proper bearing there. So you do a little bird's mouth cut, gives it a nice seat for proper bearing, and makes it all structurally very sound. When you're running hand cut rafters, typically a lot of times you won't necessarily have collar ties. Again, it depends. You do also have what are called purlins. They can run, these run along the length. Let's see, is there a picture of one? So your purlin are these boards here that kind of run the length of the rafters and kind of attach them all in the middle. That keeps everything secured towards the middle. And then I wanted to go back to that other picture, didn't I? Well, anyways, see, now I forgot what I was going to say because I meant to go back to that other picture and I don't remember which one it was. But oh, I know what it was now. Where did that picture go? Oh, here it is. You also have battens. These will go on the top of the roof. Purlins and battens are more common with like post frame structures, right? Timber frame structures, things where you have rafters, but they're spaced far apart. So you may be using like timber rafters, and then they're spaced maybe 4 feet apart. You're gonna need, at least on top of the roof, in order to attach your roofing material, you're gonna need some battens running across top, or even purlins. Some people just call them purlins in all cases, whether it's top or bottom. This diagram here specifies between the two. But yeah, that's going to be kind of important if you have timber frame roof, like I was saying, with large gaps between them. Usually, if you're just doing standard framing, they'll be spaced either 16 on center or 24 on center. So they're not going to be too far apart. So you won't always have purlins, battens, those kind of things. But that is something to be aware of. It may be necessary for your particular project. Crown up. Yeah, crown up. As with all framing, lumber is not perfect. It's usually always going to be crowned one direction or the other. It just means kind of slightly bent one way or another, right? On the if you stand it up vertically, it may crown up or it may kind of crown down. When you're framing roofs, you're always going to crown up. So the top of the roof will be the crown where it kind of bows up, or what's that? Concave? Convex. I don't know. Anyways, you get what I'm saying, right? If you're not familiar with crown and board, look it up. There's some good YouTube videos that will explain it real quick, show you how to crown a board. Basically, you just pick the board up, look down it on one edge, and you can easily see which way it's curving, right? Same thing with floor joists, same thing with wall studs, all these. Every time you're framing with any 2x lumber, you're going to crown all of your lumber so that it crowns the same direction. So all your studs, all your rafters, all your joists, they all need to crown the same direction. Joists you want crowned up, rafters you want crowned up, studs you're going to want crowned out for exterior walls. For interior walls, it just kind of depends where that wall is, which side of that wall is going to be seen most often, right? But yeah, anyways, for example, if you're putting cabinets on a wall, it's going to be pretty important to make sure that you have it crowned the right way, so you're not having trouble fitting those cabinets on the wall. But now we're digressing. Let's focus on the roofs, I guess. Yeah, as far as hand cut rafters go, though, I think that's pretty much it. Let me see if anything else jogs my memory on other things that we should cover here. Hip roof framing. So yeah, this is all done with rafters. You can see here they got the hip roof. So they have the board, the ridge board that comes out to here, and then they begin the hip roof. So they bring a, do they call it a ridge board? I've always just called it a hip ridge, but I don't know what the technical term, oh, hip rafter is what they call it here. So the hip rafter is what comes down from the ridge board to the corner of the walls, right? And then off of that hip rafter, you're going to have these, what do they call them here? Hip jack rafter. Yeah, okay, a jack rafter. I guess that makes sense. I don't do a lot of hip roofs, if you can't tell. I prefer gable roofs. I think they look a lot, and I don't like the look of hip roofs. So I almost always just do straight gables. Yeah. So anyways, you got your jack rafter, cripple rafter under a skylight there. So there's some different terms with that. But that shows you a little bit of how you'd frame a roof with rafters. Frame a hip roof with rafters. You also got your valley jack rafters and valley, what do they call that? Probably they don't, valley rafter. Yeah. So same thing with the hip. Valley is just inverted from the hip, right? It's pretty straightforward. Yeah. So now let's go and talk about some of the details of actually putting the roof up on the structure. We'll look at this model again. You guys probably remember this if you watched the previous streams. This is our nice little affordable 1,200 square foot home. So this is what I was talking about, keeping a roof simple. If you're trying to keep it affordable, this is about as simple as you can possibly. This is the cheapest roof that I could possibly think of to build for a 1,200 square foot home. You don't necessarily need the front porch here, so we could have shortened it a little bit, but regardless of how long it is, the design of this roof is the simplest, cheapest way you could do a roof, okay? It's a 412 pitch, which in my opinion is perfect budget roof pitch. Because at that roof pitch, that slope, you can easily, your roofers can easily walk on there to install the roofing. It's not going to be an issue at all. There's no danger of sliding off or anything like that. I mean, it's extremely safe, easy to work on. It's easy to haul materials around on, everything like that, right? So the roof pitch is an important factor. If you're going to go real steep with like a 12-12 pitch or something, yeah, it's going to be tough. If you're doing an A-frame house, I'm doing one right now, the roofing is a real challenge. It's because of the roof pitch. And that's, you know, I'm not a roofer, so I don't experience that a lot. I've framed multiple types of roofs in my time. I've even done, oh, what was that one? It was like a octagonal or hexagonal. That was years ago now. It was a weird one. Anyways, this is how you do a nice, simple, cheap roof though. Now let's see if I can pull out the certain parts of this one. I think it's all just under framing. So let's take that off, take that off. I want to pull out just the trusses. Yeah, it's gonna be a little tough. Okay, so let's identify our subfascia. So, well, yeah, I can show you all the different parts here. So, oh, and something I didn't mention before with the trusses, I actually don't show it here. But we saw it before in one of the diagrams. When you do a gable truss, it's called a gable truss. It doesn't have the webbing the same as the other trusses. And I mentioned this before, so you may have noticed. Well, that's basically that's a gable truss. So you have all the vertical boards. Instead of having your typical webbing, let me go back to the actual truss. I thought I had a picture. Oh yeah, this one. This is the picture I was looking for. So you'll have all your normal trusses with the diagonal webbing. But then at the end, you can see here's one here, and then up here at this gable, they have another one, and there will be one. Sorry, mouse was on the screen, wrong screen again. You can see a little gable here. You can see there's a gable there, and there will be another gable out at the end of this section of roof here. The way you can see here, they do these vertical sections webbing, this vertical webbing to simulate a stud wall, because you're going to be attaching sheathing to that truss, right? Also this truss, because there's a full wall under it, right? It doesn't have to carry the load the same way that the other trusses do. So it's perfectly all right to have all these vertical members here. It's not going to weaken the truss at all, because it's fully supported under the length of it by the wall. So all you really need here is a way to attach the sheathing. Therefore, they provide you with these vertical with the vertical webbing in order to have usually your 16 on center or 24 on center spacing. I think these usually come 24 on center for those vertical members. And so anyways, you'll have something to nail your sheathing onto as you sheathe that front wall. All the other trusses, like we saw before, are going to have that kind of diagonal webbing. Let's go back to our... So for the model, I just built one truss and then repeated it for the whole roof. So I didn't bother designing a separate truss for the gable trusses. I know what they look like. I'm familiar with it. As far as modeling out the build itself, it wasn't necessary to make that distinction there. But just know that your gable truss on each end of the roof is going to have those vertical members, and then all the rest will be like you see here with kind of that diagonal webbing, most likely. Now, another thing you can see here that I did model into it is the bracing, right? So you got like your rat runs. This is what we were talking about before. They come all along. There's one on that side, one on this side. We got one on each of the diagonal webbing members. And then we even have some that run all the way along the vertical member that goes right down the middle of the trusses. This is a pretty standard way of doing it. There's a few other, once they're installed, there's a few other things you could do. Sometimes you'll see a traditional way of bracing trusses. Instead of doing it in a straight run like this, you'll have these rat runs instead will run from like the center, and they'll run diagonally out towards the outer wall, right? And then for the other end, you'll just have one go in the opposite direction back towards the middle of the truss for that end gable. And then you'll do that on both sides. You'll also run one for these ones down the middle. It may be specified to run from the top, or the old traditional way of doing it was to run it from the top all the way down to the bottom. I think that's right. Maybe I have that. Maybe it went from the bottom up to the... No, I think it went this way, from the top here down to the bottom. I don't think it really actually mattered. The only reason I think that might matter is because you're really trying to support it from racking, right? As I mentioned before, the bracing is to keep the roof up and not fall flat. I think you would want to hold the top. I always just follow the manufacturer's directions as far as bracing, and nowadays I always see them call for bracing that looks something like this. Okay, on a 412 pitch, this is going to be pretty typical. The steeper your roof is, the bigger your truss is, the more stresses that they have to engineer for, so it may be more complex as far as your bracing goes. Another thing that we can see here is, so I mentioned all that, the subfascia, which I started to mention before. We'll look at that now. You can see the subfascia going all the way around the building here. So when these trusses go up, none of this is going to be on there, right? It's going to be just the trusses. They get set on top of that wall. You're going to come back after all the trusses are up, and you're going to have that subfascia put on. It's usually just a 2x6 material, something like that. Sometimes, so in this case, I don't have a plumb cut on these tails, these truss tails. So you could do a plumb cut where it's just a straight down cut, and then you'll run your fascia flat against it. You may have to, I do have an example of that. Hold on. It's easier if I just bring up the example. Which one was it? I have to remember which model that was. Not that one. Maybe it was this one. Nope, I don't have the roof on that one yet. Okay. Oh, this is the one I was thinking of. So this might be it. Yep, there we go. Okay, let me bring this over here so you can see it. You probably remember this model as well. This was the 900 square foot over under with the garage underneath, living quarters up top. It's basically a garage with an apartment. But yeah, the roof framing is what we want to look at, because I did this one. You can see these are still trusses. They're still heel trusses. Okay, I almost always do heel trusses. This is basically a full 12 inches there at the end. You may need more than that, right? The heel truss could be built up higher than that, but in this case, the bottom cord is all I'm using for the spacing there. But yeah, you can see I did the plumb cut here for the tails on the trusses, and then you just run that subfascia right along there. But you'll want to either bevel cut this, or if you don't bevel cut that 2x for your subfascia, you'll have to slide this 2x down a little bit so that it doesn't get in the way of your sheathing, because you want that sheathing to extend all the way out over your subfascia. Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's much else I need to say about that. Just, you know, different ways of doing it. Usually when you do the plumb cut like this, they'll want to do a bird box where you bring it straight across the bottom and then up. It just requires a little extra framing piece there. I don't really like doing those that much. Where I live, I like more the rustic look of doing a roof without the bird boxes. But you know, whatever. It's to me, it's kind of just personal choice. And it depends what aesthetic you're going for, right? I'm trying not to look like a house in the suburbs where I build. I like it to look more unique, more kind of rural, rustic, whatever you want to call it, farmhouse style. But anyways, to me, the birdhouse, the bird box look, it looks very suburban to me. Let's see. So we got the subfascia. I called that out. Subfascia is going to go up the gables as well, right? So what do you attach it to here on the gables? Because that's probably a question some people have. How do you get that overhang on the gables? The overhang for the eaves, right, running along each side is pretty obvious. The truss just extends over the wall, and that gives you your overhang. How do you get the overhang over here where the gable is? Well, this is how you do it, okay? You're going to bring these what outlookers, outrigger, people call them, I always call them outlookers. Okay, I think that's what they're called. I've heard them called lookouts, outlookers, outriggers. I did probably a few other things too. I call them outlookers, whatever. They're just a little 2x material you're going to attach to the truss here. That's something else. I didn't mention this before with the gable truss. When you're getting a gable truss, the way that I actually like to do it, I did not model that in this one because I was just doing it quick. Let me see if it's done that way in the other one. You'll have what's called a dropped top cord. Did I do that on this one? No, I know I have modeled it before on some of them, but it's like I said, because I just kind of copy and paste the same truss over and over again to save on time when I do these models. I don't necessarily model that out. So really what you would have, I don't see the one I'm thinking of. So just imagine, let's see if I can get a good view here. So this is our truss, right? You can see the truss there highlighted in blue. If this top cord of the truss, it would actually be one full board width lower. So the top of that truss would be on the bottom of these outlookers. So your outlooker is going to run from the second to last truss, is going to run across the top of your gable truss, after which you'll block. I know I modeled this out. I probably have one I could show you. Oh, which model did I do that on though? I cannot remember. That one didn't have the roof on it yet. I don't think it was that one. 1,200 square foot, 25 by 25 garage. I may have done it on the garage model. Let me check that one. Because that was a small model, so I took the extra time to kind of detail that stuff, I think. Sheathing. Is it? Wall sheathing. Let me turn that off real quick. Yeah, okay. So let me pull this one up here. I'll show you. Okay, so this is our little basic 2-car garage, right? Again, we got gable trusses, 412 pitch, runs the whole length of it. But here, I actually did the gable trusses differently. You can see it's got, the gable truss has the vertical members. There we go, highlighted in blue. So you've got your vertical pieces for the whole gable truss, and you can see the top cord of the gable truss runs right up here, right? It's a full board width lower than all the other trusses. So that way our outlookers run straight across the top of that gable truss, and then we're gonna block with some 2x material. We're gonna add blocking in between all those outlookers to complete it, right? And then we're gonna add a rafter tail there as well to match the tails of all the other trusses. So that's how you're going to get your overhang framing, and then you're going to bring your subfascia right along the end of all those outlookers, right? Usually these outlookers are ran long, and then someone will come up with a chalk line, snap a chalk line across the end of them where you want them cut, and that way you get a nice straight front on all that. You do the same thing with your, if you're doing rafters for, instead of trusses for your roof, you'll do the same thing with all your rafter tails. Typically, you'll run a chalk line across them so you get a nice straight line, and then cut them all so they're perfectly straight going across. When you put that subfascia on, it's going to look wavy if you don't have them all nice and straight, a nice straight cut across all those tails. So anyways, that's your overhang framing for your gables. Basically the blocking is blocking in between. That's going to keep everything nice and sturdy. You got your outlookers are going to run, usually they're going to be about 4 feet, right? Because you got 24 on center trusses. You're going to have usually at least, I would typically do an 18-inch to a 24-inch overhang. In this case, it's 24-inch overhang. So you got about 4 foot of lookout there. You're going to attach it back here. Sometimes you'll even see a good way to do this is to use upside down joist hangers on these, and that'll keep, because the weight's going to be pushing on that overhang, right? So the board is going to want, this end of the board is going to want to come up. So if you put an upside down joist hanger on that, nail it all in, it's going to keep that super secure. So if you're in a high snow load area, that's something that might be called out by the engineer, or you may just want to do it anyways. It doesn't cost very much to add some joist hangers there. It really doesn't. And it adds, it just makes the whole thing a lot more secure. But if you don't have a high snow load or anything, then it's probably really not necessary. Yeah, this one, again, you can see I did the bracing. This one just has 3 rows of bracing because it is a very small structure, pretty simple. It's just a garage. The last piece of blocking that I'll mention, haven't mentioned yet, we got this blocking in between all the trusses here. That's going to be important because you want to have, again, something to nail sheathing to. You're going to want to block airflow there. You'll leave a little bit of airflow. So most times if it's a vented attic, right, a vented roof assembly, usually what I've seen called out in plans is like every 3rd block or every other block, you're going to make some little cuts in, some holes near the top. A lot of times they'll just make a couple of V cuts in the top. Basically that's just enough to allow airflow through, because your vented roof assembly is going to want air to flow from the eaves. You'll have a vented soffit, right? A vented soffit on your eave to allow air into the eaves. That air is going to flow through those holes in that blocking all the way up to the peak of the roof, and that's going to allow any moisture that gets up in your attic space to dry out and flow out through the peak, so you don't have any moisture problems in there, mildew, mold, and all that stuff, right? Anything else? Crown up, fly rafters, notched. Yeah. I think that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot else to doing the roofs with rafters or trusses. You think if there's anything else I wanted to show here? Oh, I know what I wanted to talk about. One last thing with rafters, and then I think we'll finish it up for today. let me see if I can find an example of it. So there's really two ways of doing rafters. I meant to mention this before. I think I thought of it and then I forgot what I was going to say, so I didn't. But trying to think how. Let me think. Because you have rafters that are supported by a ridge board, and then you have rafters that are supported by a ridge beam. And I'm trying to think, how would I specify the difference there? That's kind of an interesting diagram. Shows you all the different kinds of roofs. Skillion lean-to style. That's what you're doing, isn't it, KJ? I think you mentioned you were doing something kind of like that. Butterfly. Boy, that would be interesting in a snowy climate. M-shaped. There's some interesting stuff in here. Oh, I wonder if it's got, so the hexagonal. I've done a hexagonal roof like that before. It was actually a two-tiered roof. It was kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, okay. Anyways, I was just seeing if anything else came to mind from looking at that I wanted to mention. Let's look for the rafters though. Maybe if I just search ridge beam versus ridge board, and then I'll talk about what the difference is and what you need to think about as far as the design differences with those two types. Ridge beam versus ridge board roof framing. Yeah, okay. This is basically what I was looking for. Okay, this is a perfect diagram because I can show you, and actually this even showed, that's not what I, can I go to just the picture? That's probably as big as it gets though, huh? Oops, that's not, where am I? I'm over here. So I want to take that out. We won't go back to here. I want to see, does it get bigger? Or is that it? Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is perfect. This will show, and you can even see here in the blocking they have the little V cuts that I was talking about. They did it in every single block here. You could do that. I mean, usually I've seen plans only call for it like every other block or every third block. You could do every single block as well. It really kind of depends how much airflow you want or need, depending on the temperatures and humidity in your environment, that sort of stuff. But what I wanted to point out here is both of these roofs are framed with hand-cut rafters, okay? This one kind of looks like trusses because you have the collar tie, you have the rafter tie at the bottom, right? So when it all comes together, it kind of looks like a truss, whereas this is very open. You can tell there's no collar ties, no rafter ties. If you were trying to do a vaulted ceiling, this is how you do a vaulted ceiling with mouse on the wrong screen again, sorry. So it's all nice and open here. This is how you do a vaulted ceiling with hand-cut rafters, okay? This is especially important, so because I'm building an A-frame right now, this is very pertinent information to how you would do an A-frame build typically. We got ours as a kit, so I didn't have a lot of leeway in how we did it, but if you're building an A-frame, same idea here, right? There's two ways to do it. You can either do it the way that we did it with the A-frame we're building currently, which actually doesn't even have a ridge board, because essentially what we did was build giant trusses by using the floor joists. Yeah, let's see, how can I explain this? So the A-frame that we're building right now, the roof rafters, it's all LVL, right? The roof rafters run from the ridge all the way down to the main floor, the bottom main floor, right? Because it's an A-frame. So the floor joists of the main floor act as your rafter ties, and the floor joists of the loft act as collar ties. And then because of the size of the A-frame we're doing right now, there actually are, in fact, actual collar ties up above, basically in the ceiling of the loft, that run the full length of the structure. So there's collar ties on every single one. So we ended up essentially building giant trusses, and then we're building all the living area within those trusses, right? That's one way to do it. The other way to do an A-frame, the more traditional way of building an A-frame, I believe. I think this is the more traditional way of doing it. At least to me, that traditionally this is how I've seen them built. You put up a ridge beam like this here, this orange ridge beam that we have here, or brown, whatever you want to call that. is going to be resting on a post at each end, right? With this method over here, these rafters, you don't need a post. There's no load bearing post at right down the middle of your wall at each end of the structure, right? With this method of framing with rafters, you do have a nice open space on the interior, but at each end, at the wall, at each end of the structure, you're going to have this big post that runs from carrying that beam all the way down to your foundation, right? Now, this becomes a little bit of a problem if you're trying to do like a chalet style with a big window wall right here, right? You'll have to account for that post running right down the middle, and just kind of do windows off to each side. But if you wanted to do a whole bunch of windows, which is what we see a lot up here in the mountains, kind of that chalet style window wall at one end of the structure, something like this will allow you not to have to worry about that post right in the middle. But then you do have to have all these collar ties, rafter ties, and whatnot as well. So two basic ways of doing it. In this case, that ridge board, this is called a ridge board when you're doing it this way. That's not really structural, as in it's not carrying any load. It's really just a surface for these for the top end of these rafters to rest against and press against. So you'll have force being applied to each side of that ridge board, kind of sandwiching it, right? But you don't have any load that's being carried on that ridge board. So it's not technically load bearing, right? In this case with the beam, when you're doing it this way, that is a load bearing beam. So that definitely has to be supported appropriately, hence the post at each end of it. And you may even need a post in the middle depending on how long it is, right? But with this method, what you would do then is run the rafters over the top of that beam. You could actually hang the rafters on the beam and just leave a little piece of the top of the rafter that goes over the top of it. So you do like a little cut at the end of that beam. It's usually easier just to run the rafters over the top of it. So that's typically what you will see done in that case. But yeah, two different ways of framing with hand cut rafters. Each gives you a different end result, right? This one gives you more of an attic space. This one gives you a nice high vaulted cathedral ceiling, whatever you want to call it, for a big open space in the main living area. So keep that in mind. A small modern double shed roof, skillion. Yeah, okay. Clear story windows. Yep, windows along the one side. Single story home. Yep. Okay, that's what I thought I remembered. So yeah, that's I guess the only thing I didn't talk about now is an overbuild. So when you have, I guess I'll just use this as an example because it's here at the moment. You have your normal, so let's say you have a home. It's got, just your standard roof on it. It may be a gable roof, maybe a hip roof, whatever. You have an entryway, right? Your front door area is just exposed. It's open. There's no roof over the front door. And you see a lot of people nowadays like to build that little gable out over the front entry area to give it a covered area. It makes the house look a lot nicer, some curb appeal and all that. I'm actually about to do one on my house as well, so I'll have videos out on that at some point. I had to build the deck first, so we're in the process of getting the deck finished right now. Then I can build the roof. So I got to take all the old roof off. It's got old exposed fastener metal roof I'm replacing with standing seam. So I got to take all the old roof off. Then I'll frame out a new section of roof just like this, basically. Kind of just like this. So imagine this is my existing roof. This is the new roof I'm going to build out over the front door, so that it's covered. If you live in a snowy climate where you get a lot of snow, this is huge. I would not ever live in a home in a snowy climate that didn't have an overbuild, a cricket. It's called lots of different things. A little section of roof that covers your entry area on the exterior, right? Because I've lived a few years now without one, and it's terrible having to shovel off that front door, because especially with a metal roof, all of our snow just slides right down and onto our front step, essentially. So I have to shovel off the ice and stuff that falls off the roof, and it's terrible. So we're going to build a little roof overbuild that sticks out over the front door area, just like this. It'll be supported by posts out here at each end from the deck. Right, so those posts are part of the deck. I just extended them all the way up. Right now they're sitting up in the air, 12 feet high, but I'll cut them to the exact height that I need and then run beams out to them from the existing roof and then build a whole roof out over that. So I'll have videos on that soon. What am I doing? That's not what I was trying to do. I just wanted to click on that. Yeah, and we kind of looked at an example of doing that earlier with the sleepers. So you would just put some sleepers. If you remember, I was talking about the sleepers before, those boards that kind of lay flat on the existing roof at an angle, matching the angle of the new section roof that you're going to build. And then all your rafters end or die on that sleeper board. And then you just frame it out, going out as far as you need to with normal hand cut rafters. The keys with doing any of that is making sure that you have proper support. So you're going to need beams, posts, whatever, down below to hold up that section of roof, right? That's kind of the key with doing anything like that. But that's the only other thing I don't think we really covered with roofs was doing an overbuild like that. So, and there's lots of videos online of guys doing it. There's a few things that I would say there's correct ways to do it and there's wrong ways to do it. Half the videos I see on YouTube, they do it the wrong way. It's not, an engineer would never approve the way that they do it. And then half the videos I see on YouTube are done more or less correct. The way that I like to do it is so there's really a couple ways that you could do it. You can either, I'll just mention the most common way that you're going to see it done is you're going to run 2 posts out here at the end, right? Wherever you want your little overbuild to end. You'll run 2 posts, then you'll have a beam running across the 2 posts across the front, right? So you'll build yourself a nice little timber framed gable there. Is what most people do because it looks really nice. And then you're going to run beams from the post back to the house, 1 from each post back to the house, right? But how do you attach that beam to the house is where a lot of people get it wrong. So there's a couple ways. This is where I was going to say there's a couple ways to do that. One is to rest that beam on top of, so you cut into the top of your roof, you cut out the sheathing right where that beam's going to slide in, and you rest that beam on top of your double top plate of your wall. So if you remember, we go back to the wall framing, you have that double top plate at the top of the wall, and then all your roof framing sits on top of that double top plate. Well, if you run this beam and the end of it that hits the house is resting on top of that double top plate, as long as it's a double top plate, you don't necessarily need to have the studs like a post or anything directly below that. It's ideal if you do, and if you have access, like if it's a new build, definitely put that in there. But a lot of remodels, retrofitting a roof, an overbuild onto an existing home, you don't want to tear open the whole wall. So a lot of times I've seen engineers approve just resting that beam on top of the double top plate as long as the load that it's carrying is appropriate. And then you just seal it all up and frame it from there. The other way to do it is you would need to have a built up post, stud pack or something in that wall. And then you can either cut a hole in the wall and run the beam into the wall, which leaves a hole in your wall. It's not necessarily the best for if you're going for airtight, high performance homes. You're not going to want to cut a big hole in the wall to slide a beam in. So the other thing you can do, as long as you have that post in the wall, is you through the sheathing you can attach. So you sheath over it and then you attach a beam hanger onto that, right? Your engineer can specify the size of beam hanger you need or whatever. But yeah, you'll put a beam hanger on there. That way you're not cutting a hole into the wall itself. You can hang that beam wherever you want on the wall, height wise, right? It can be 10 feet high or it could be 8 feet high, wherever you're trying to aim for. And really that's the way to do it if you're concerned about performance, energy efficiency, and not cutting a big hole in your wall. Because if you do that, slide the beam in, you just want to make sure it gets sealed up nice and tight afterwards. So use a really good sealant, Lexel or whatever. Make sure that it's all sealed up. But yeah, those are the 2 main ways, or sorry, I guess that's a few different ways, 3 different ways that you can attach the beams to the house when you're running the overbuild stuff like this. If you have questions about that, let me know. But there is some good information out there on that online. You can pretty easily find. I just want you to be aware there's some bad information out there as well, where people do not properly support their roofs. Okay. Anatomy of a roof. That looks interesting. Sorry, I just like looking at this stuff for fun. I mean, literally, I'll pull up diagrams and just kind of dissect them for fun to see if I learn anything. This one's pretty basic though, but they call out a lot of different things here that you can see. This is including your underlayment, roofing material. It's even got your chimney on there with flashing and everything. But you can see your standard. This is again with rafters, and then it's got, what do they call these? Number 8, battens. Yeah, okay, battens across the top. They don't have any purlins in this one, because typically for like a small home or whatever, you're not going to necessarily need purlins. Now, if you're doing a big barn dominium or something with a large roof, then you may need some purlins there, most likely. And the purlins, a lot of times, well, that's neither here nor there. It'll be specified either by your engineer or, well, I guess it'd have to, if you're doing hand cut rafters, you're not going to have engineering done by anybody else. So it'd have to be by your structural engineer on the plans. If you have questions about it, talk to them. They can specify what you need to do for your exact design criteria in your area, your wind, your snow loads, you know, all that stuff, seismic and whatnot. So make sure you're following proper prescriptions for your area. But hopefully this has helped you guys understand the basics of roof framing, some of the options that you have out there, so that when you're designing your home, at least you know what's possible and kind of can go from there, right? Don't expect you to know everything, but design is really probably the most important phase of any home build, because that's going to determine what happens for the rest of your build. Essentially, it's going to determine your budget. It's going to determine how long it takes. It's going to determine the level of skill that you need, right? So everything starts with your home design. So the goal really for me doing these live streams and giving you guys this information is just to help you make better decisions when it comes to the design phase of your home, because a lot of people will just go out online and they'll find some plans online and decide that that's what they want to build without really digging into those plans, understanding the design and how it would actually work for them and their needs, right? So again, like if you're trying to stay on a budget, make sure your roof is real simple. That set of plans you find online might look really nice, right? The picture might look really pretty and you want to build, that's a house you want to live in, but you only have a $350,000 budget. And that house has like 3 hips and 4 gables, and it's got a change in pitch in 3 different places. That's going to be a very expensive roof to build. So even though it looks really nice, if it blows your budget, you're not going to be able to do it. So at the design phase, it's important to understand these things, that you are looking at things that are appropriate for what you need, what you can afford, and then you can move from there based on aesthetics, right? But also just for hiring your framing contractors, you need, if they ask you, do you want hand cut rafters or trusses? Because they're going to be the ones figuring all this out, since they're the ones that have to put it together. A lot of times your framing contractor will take care of ordering your trusses for you, but you need to tell them if you want trusses. You need to tell them if you want raised heel trusses. You need to tell them what you want your overhang to be. I would recommend don't go smaller than an 18-inch overhang. I would even prefer a 24-inch overhang in almost all cases. Especially if you're in a snowy climate. But even just with rain, that extra overhang keeps stuff from being splashed up against the house or snow piling up against the house and that sort of stuff, right? So the bigger the overhang, the better. In my opinion, you really can't go wrong with bigger or a larger overhang. Put roofs over entryways, porches, decks, patios. The more you cover those things up, the longer they're going to last, the more enjoyable they're going to be. So when it comes to designing your roofs, try, if you can, within your budget, like I was saying, try to build overbuilds, crickets, or whatever you want to call them, the little roofs that come out over those parts of the house, okay? What else? Roof pitch is important. A lower roof pitch is going to be way, way easier to work on. It's going to be faster and cheaper. The steeper your roof pitch is, changes in roof pitch and all that kind of stuff, it just makes it way more complex, more time consuming for roofers to do their job, okay? So you're going to end up paying a lot more. A roof can be a small item in your overall build, or it can be a really, really big item in your overall build, just depending on the design, right? So those are some of my tips. Let me know in the comments or to the video, guys. If you're watching this later, we're not live anymore, go ahead and still leave a comment. Let me know if you have any other tips for roof design, or if I forgot anything that's important that you think others should know. I mean, there's a lot to it. And so my goal is just kind of cover the basics, make sure you guys have a good starting level of understanding with roof design, roof framing, and hopefully it all comes together in the end for you. It's not anything too complex, right? I wonder if I should talk about the sheathing as well. We'll probably talk about sheathing next time and get into dry-in and that kind of stuff, I think. Because we're done with the framing now. We've talked about all the framing. Well, maybe I'll go into deck framing. Are you guys interested in seeing more information on deck framing? I kind of discussed deck framing with the floor framing, right? So I think we've covered that. I don't know if there's enough else to cover on deck framing that I could do a whole nother live stream on it. Yeah, let me know if you have specific questions about deck framing, or if you would like more in-depth discussion on deck framing. I could design some 3D models for examples, and we can go through that. I could show some video from the deck I'm doing right now. It has a lot of different deck concepts that I'm building into it. So yeah, I will have videos on the deck coming out soon as well. I've been recording it all. I just have to find the time to sit down and actually edit the videos. That's the hardest part, because this is not my job. Editing videos, having the YouTube channel is just a hobby for me. So I spend most of my time doing actual work with my hands outside. And it's hard to find the time to edit these videos, because some of them do take a little bit of time to put together. But anyway, so I am making more. They're coming. I am still working on a series where we're going to do a SketchUp how-to, essentially, or a tutorial, I guess. We're going to build a house in SketchUp together. I'm going to show you my exact process, how I kind of figure out what materials I'm going to need, and then from that I can figure out pricing for materials. I can estimate labor based on some design stuff, right, by figuring it out in the 3D model. So I think I'm going to have a series coming out where we'll go through that. You know, I don't know how long each video is going to be yet. Right now I'm just working on recording it, and then I'll split it up into different segments, but we'll probably do like foundation and then framing and whatnot, right, and move on from there. But if you guys have specific questions about how to use SketchUp and whatnot, you can look forward to that. You can reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions you have if you're looking into it already. But yeah, hopefully that series will be coming out soon, and it'll be more in-depth into how I do the 3D modeling on the computer when I'm planning a build, right? So I think the one that we'll actually do is a spec home build that I'm planning on doing at some point. We may start it next year in the spring. We'll see. But we're going to design it. I haven't built it virtually yet, so we're going to do the full build in SketchUp. I think we'll do all that together, and I'll just use that as the series that we're going to do. But I have some other small builds that we can do as well for that series. I don't want to do anything too complex, because it would just turn into a really long series, lots and lots of hours of building. But if I stick with something small and simple, the spec home build plan that I think I'll do or give you guys is the what was it, 1,600 square foot. It's like a 3-bed, 2.5 bath. It's going to be on a basement. That the basement will have another like 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, probably a media room as well. It's a farmhouse style, pretty simple overall. It's nothing fancy, which was kind of the goal. It's a spec home, so you want to keep your costs as low as possible. So, but anyways, we'll go through that. I think that's going to be fun. I just need to work on the commentary for it a little bit and figure out the structure of the videos. But working on that, working on some other stuff. So thanks for watching, guys. It's been another fun live stream talking about roof framing. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time. And let's see. Oops, where did my stream go? I think I have to close it from this one. All right. Well, anyways, hope you all have a good week, and we should be back next Sunday with another live stream, unless something comes up, and then we'll just push it a week. But yep. All right. See you next time.